Hey friend, I'm Adrienne. Welcome back to Better Days Today. Today's episode is for anyone who's ever had a quiet moment of reckoning. That middle of the night realization that this version of your life isn't quite what you thought it would be. You've done the things, made the choices, lived the roles, showed up the way you're supposed to, but somewhere along the way, it started feeling like you were shrinking to fit into your life, instead of creating a life big enough to hold all of you. This episode was sparked by the book, The Wedding People. I know I'm a little behind the curve on reading this. This was a Read with Jenna book club pick. It was quite a while ago too, definitely last year, but this book's been out for a minute. I don't know what it was about this book, but I read it and I just felt very seen. I felt like this was the most real dialogue I've read in a book in a long time. But the thing about the book is when I wasn't reading it, which I read it super quickly, I kind of binged it, but when I wasn't reading it, I was thinking about the characters, I was thinking about the story, and I was thinking about quotes from the book that were making me reflect on my own life. Today, we're going to talk about what it means to start saying what you mean, the voice that waits in the dark to criticize everything you've done, the kind of loneliness we don't talk enough about, even though many of us feel it, and what it looks like to sit in the house or the life that you built and ask, is this still right for me? If you've ever looked around at your life, maybe you're in this season right now, and you thought, I made all the choices. Why doesn't it feel good? Or if you've been carrying some kind of truth that feels too uncomfortable to say out loud, even though you feel like it would be liberating if you actually did, this conversation is for you. We're going to walk through all of this, and the stuff we're covering is inspired by quotes in the book that I had highlighted. So the first thing, I'll read the quote. Phoebe prefers this new way of talking, and maybe this is just one of the really nice things about getting older. Maybe this is the part of her life where she gets to start saying what she means, for better or worse. Because no amount of truth can be worse than the feeling she got after years of hiding from it. That quote, I don't know what it was about it, but I feel like that's one of the big lessons I've learned in the past several years. That when you're not saying the uncomfortable thing, you're really just trading short-term discomfort for long-term suffering. In the moment, it might feel right to keep the peace. But after you're out of that moment where you can stay comfortable and stay protected in that silence, there's usually an ache. The discomfort of not saying the thing you wanted to say, or feeling like you're pretending like everything's fine, but it's not fine. That quiet resentment that builds. I know that I've experienced this. Sometimes it's easier not to say the thing, so you don't say the thing. And then time has passed and you look back and you realize that you would have saved yourself a lot of restless nights and ruminating if you just said the thing from the get-go. Now, I'm not talking about speaking up in this way that's reckless, where you're just saying things because you can. I mean the stuff that you know, like deep in your bones is true and you're holding back on it. And I have an example of this. I was in a long-term relationship a lot of years ago. It was a past relationship. And somewhere along the way, I felt like I was just like a little bit dimmer when I was around him, a little bit quieter, not quite as funny. And I think somewhere along the way, I started telling myself a story based on his reactions or comments or however I was reading the situation, not even saying that that was what he intended. But I started telling myself this story about how he wanted me to show up or how I should show up. But I had this feeling of like, I'm not fully being myself. And I came close to saying something a few times. I don't know where the shift happened, but lately I feel like I'm being less me when I'm around you, and just have an open conversation about it. You know, like the me 10 years ago, it's so uncomfortable to say that. The me now, I'd rather say it and get the conversation out of the way and come to some type of understanding, talk it out, get it out of my head, than hold on to it. But me back then, it just felt easier and safer to not say anything. And so it builds and it builds. And I ask one of my best friends. This person knows me better than most people. what is your honest opinion about me and this other person together, or how I am in that relationship? And this isn't if you say the wrong thing, I'm going to hold on to it, many years later. I have some stuff going on in my mind, and I would like essentially to know, am I crazy for thinking these things? But I didn't want to say what the thing was before he said it. And I said, I just want your opinion. And then I'll share with you how I've been feeling. And maybe it's the same. Maybe you're picking up on it, or maybe it's not. And he said to me, you're smaller when you're around him. And basically everything I was thinking. You're not as loud. You're not as funny. You're a little less ridiculous. It's like your toned down version of the you that I get when you and I are alone. And I told him that's exactly how I felt. And I said, I don't know why or when that started, but I knew I was doing it. And he said, why don't you just talk to him? Talk to him about how you feel. And I was like, I don't know. Like, how do you say to somebody, I feel like I don't know how to be myself around you. Like, we've been together for a couple of years. It didn't feel like something that I knew how to talk about. So I didn't. And I held it in. And I had this feeling growing of he doesn't like me anymore. He doesn't love me anymore. He loves the idea of who he thinks I am. And this disconnect felt like it was growing and growing. Fast forward, when we finally break up, he wrote in a letter, basically, I knew who you were, but I thought I could change you. And at the time, of course, that stung. But in retrospect, I think had I just had the conversation about feeling less like myself when I'm around him, morphing into this thing that I thought he wanted me to be, then maybe we would have had the uncomfortable conversation about the fact that my big, loud personality, which, if you know me in real life, we can laugh for hours about the silliest stuff. But yeah, if I had had that conversation years prior, hey, I feel like when I'm around you, I'm kind of shape-shifting a little bit, and I can feel it happening, and I don't know why it's happening, but it is, then maybe things either would have ended earlier, or there would have been a mature enough dialogue to get to the root of what was going on and move forward. Now, I think everything in life happens for us, so I think I needed to go through all of that and get to the point that I'm at now, where I can have difficult conversations in life, especially in relationships, and I'm in a relationship that I'm very happy in. So it's not to say, I wish that turned out differently. I just think that the thing that I was holding inside was kind of like the elephant in the room anyways, and how much easier things could have been if we just talked about it. I feel like that has come up in a lot of other ways throughout my life where, you kind of hold in the thing, or it's just easier to not say the thing. But I do feel like I'm at a point in my life, like I said, I have that realization of I'm trading short-term discomfort for long-term suffering when I hold the thing in. Now that I know that, that's not really something I do anymore. But that quote, maybe this is the part of her life when she gets to start saying what she means for better or worse, because no amount of truth can be worse than the feeling she got after years of hiding from it. Now, that was just one of those things as I'm reading the book, I just stop and I'm like, oh my God, can I relate to that? And start thinking about a lot of different things. So this first quote, and me talking about it, is just kind of an invitation to ask yourself, what truth have you been carrying that feels heavy only because it's been hidden? What's something that you're keeping inside that maybe would be a massive relief if you just said the thing out loud? The next quote, Phoebe was the only person waiting in the dark to condemn herself for every single thing when the day was over. I think a lot of women can relate to this. I know I certainly did, because I have spent plenty of moments in the middle of the night or otherwise picking apart what I said, what I didn't say, what I did, what I should have done. And you get into this spiral and you blame yourself for things being a certain way because you showed up a certain way or you didn't show up in a certain way. Or you do something that's really embarrassing and you think the whole world is laughing at you when really 2 people noticed it and they didn't care. But yet we pick ourselves apart for whatever the thing was, and we could just be our harshest critics when no one's watching. There's power in honest reflection. Sometimes we can do better and we should do better. In realizing that, I don't think is condemning ourselves. That's being honest. That's honest reflection. But I think when we're at the point where we're just mercilessly picking every single thing apart. It's like, to what end? And that idea of, would I say this to a friend? That has genuinely helped me. If I start beating myself up about something, I think like, would I ever say this to a friend that did whatever the thing is and it's his about? And when the answer is no, I'm like, okay, why are you saying it to yourself? And that type of self-talk helps me quite a bit. And I do this less now than the younger version of myself. But this particular thing also got me thinking about the idea of, if you're exhausted at the end of the day, or you're having these thoughts in the middle of the night, and you're picking yourself apart and you're feeling bad, are you actually feeling bad about the thing that happened or the way it happened? Or are you feeling bad from the story you're telling yourself about it? Sometimes we can get to a place where we amplify things in our mind, how bad they were, how awful we showed up, how stupid the thing was that we said. But really, it was like a non-issue, non-thing to everybody else. But the story we're telling ourselves about how we looked and how we came off and what that means about us, that's the thing that's causing the suffering. That's the thing that's making you pick yourself apart, because you're telling yourself a story that's really not even 100% true about the thing, whatever it was. So I found that interesting, of how harsh we can be to ourselves when no one is around, and then kind of questioning how much of that is actually rooted in the truth of the matter or in a story we're telling ourselves. To be clear, I don't have any great life epiphanies to give anybody. I think we need to kind of get to our own knowing in a lot of these things. It's just, this book felt very relatable, and it felt like reading my own struggles throughout my life on a page that this character is experiencing. And I thought, well, hey, if I feel like this is speaking to me, there's no way if I don't talk about this that somebody else won't be like, oh, I get that, I do that. Or, maybe get you to reflect a little bit on what it is you're doing and why. And if nothing else, maybe you'll go pick up the book, because not an ad, but super awesome book. The third quote that stuck out: but Phoebe is starting to understand that on some nights, Lila is probably the loneliest girl in the world, just like Phoebe. And maybe they're all lonely. Maybe this is just what it means to be a person, to constantly reckon with being a single being in one body. Maybe everybody sits up at night and creates arguments in their head for why they are the loneliest person in the world. And this struck me because I feel like when we're going through something really challenging that feels earth-shattering, life-shifting, it feels so difficult to see beyond this moment. When you're in that type of thing, at least in my experience, it almost feels like nobody else in the world could possibly understand how I feel right now. Nobody could get this. But as I get older, as I work with more people in different phases of their life and different struggles in their life, in the work that I've done in the grief space, I realized that this feeling of aloneness is so much more universal than we think it is. Part of that aloneness is the fact that we keep stuff to ourselves rather than sharing what's really going on or how we really feel. The way to true connection is through vulnerability. You don't necessarily have to have the same circumstances to understand another person, but when you get really honest in your sharing about how you're feeling and what you're going through, that experience tends to resonate more with people than we realize. And sometimes just putting a name to the fact that I feel so alone in this, or that nobody else could get this, sometimes that's just like the first step to getting out of that. Because if you say it out loud in the presence of somebody that you trust, you might find that you're not as alone as you think you are. A reflection here is, what part of you have you assumed no one else could understand, and what might change if you stopped assuming you're the only one? I think for me, when I've had this feeling, of feeling very alone in a circumstance and a feeling, I've often looked at it as like a personal failing. Like, I did this, I created this, and now I feel this, and nobody else could possibly understand it because nobody else would X, Y, Z and wind up in this feeling or this situation. But I also think that we feel alone during emotional transitions because they are difficult to talk about. Nobody wants to be the person that keeps talking about their best friend that died and is like dragging down the room, even though talking about your grief is perfectly valid. Or nobody wants to be the person that's like banging on about the affair her husband had on her or that she had on him and how, life has spiraled out of control. So whether there's shame there's I don't want to be the person that brings down the mood. There tends to be this keeping it close. This I don't want to be the person that's always complaining. Or somebody has it worse off than me. They're going through something harder. I don't need to be complaining about this. And I think when we tell ourselves these stories, especially during transitional times, that creates that feeling of aloneness. And even if somebody hasn't been through that same exact circumstance, they have probably been through something that has led them to that feeling. It's just one of those things. As I was reading it, it felt really true. I think like when I first went to college and I moved across the country, and it was this big time of transition for my whole family. And I got to college and there are a lot of things on my mind. Is like, the first time I lived away from home. I went from Boston to California. I'm on scholarship. I was always a hyperachiever, got to get all A's. So I'm like, really dedicated to the schoolwork. But then I'm also going out and having a great time. And it felt like all of these conflicting things. Like I'm so happy and excited to be in this new place and making these new friends and having all these new experiences. And then I had this homesickness for a place that I couldn't wait to leave. And all of this sadness, like my grandmother had just died and nothing felt the same or right. And in my mind, I'm like, nobody wants to hear about how I'm sad and I miss home and my grandmother's dead. So it's just way easier to plaster on the smile and go out and have a great time. But hindsight's 2020. I know now I couldn't have been the only person that was feeling any of those things. But it felt like a lonely feeling because everybody else is putting on the smile and putting their best foot forward and not being like the sad, depressing person. So you think, okay, I gotta, shove this down because nobody else is feeling this way. I can't, I don't want to be the downer in the room or whatever it is. So yeah, all that to say, I read that and I've come to the realization that though we feel alone, there's always other people feeling that same feeling. Now this quote, to be stuck inside her house was to be stuck inside herself and all the choices she made over the years. I've often asked myself, how many things do I have in my life or have I experienced in my life that at one point I was wishing for? And I think sometimes we think this role, this relationship, this experience, this achievement is going to somehow bring us to this destination of joy and happiness and all of the quote unquote good feelings. If only we do these things, if only we check these boxes. But at some point, we can wake up and realize that either we were pursuing the things that we should pursue that were out of alignment with what we genuinely wanted, or maybe all of those things were what you wanted at the time, but you've outgrown them. And I've experienced that feeling of I made all of the decisions that have led to this point, and I'm stuck with them. Like, I chose that. I know I felt that in my career when I left or before I left. It was that feeling of I put myself on this path of promotion. I went to these different locations. I made all the choices that led me to the point of being in this spot where I did not want to wake up and go to that job every day. But like on paper, promoting, I achieved the titles. I was in charge of things. I should have, quote unquote, been happier. I was making great money. On paper, everything, was as it should be. And I just kind of was looking around like, is this my life? Is this all that there is to my life? I'm going to keep waking up and going to this job that I don't want to do, that makes me miserable. And I sat in it for a while before I left because it's like, well, I picked all of these things. I set myself on this path and I knew I wanted to leave, but I didn't know what that looked like. I remember the saying, you made your bed, lay in it. I feel like my grandma used to say that. My mom has said it. Those are your choices. Now you reap what you sow. You have to deal with the consequences or the results or whatever it is. And it's often said in relation to something negative, but I think we can do that sometimes where we make all these decisions that we think are going to lead to one place, but we find ourselves in another. Like we're feeling way different than we thought. And then it's like, well, how do I undo this? Or how do I make a change that's so big that changes everything? And so you feel stuck inside this life because you built it. You have all the things you said you wanted. So you got to figure out a way to be okay with it. And I do think sometimes the way we look at things definitely informs our reality. But I also think that we could recognize that a season of life has changed. We have changed. through the season of life. And all of the things that we wanted before may not be the things that we want anymore. And we're allowed to update the blueprint. We're allowed to update the plan. We're allowed to completely change the plan. We're allowed to throw the plan away if we want to, right? It's our lives. And though those things can feel so big and insurmountable, like I can't possibly make these big, huge changes because then what? What's that going to look like? I don't know. Maybe it's better. Maybe it still doesn't quite turn out the way you thought it would. But you don't know unless you try, right? This quote, kind of like the other one about holding stuff in and not saying what you mean, it just got me thinking about how sometimes we make choices or we behave in a way where we're making ourselves smaller to fit into the life that we built. Because somehow we don't feel like we quite fit as our whole selves. So we're kind of shrinking to stay comfortable, to not have to make the big, huge change. And it just got me thinking about how sometimes we shrink to fit the situation we're in rather than making decisions that will create situations that are big enough to hold all of us, to hold our whole selves. Sometimes I think as I read these books, like, you're reading way too deep into this. Like, just stick with the plot, Adrian. Like, just enjoy the story. We don't always need to contemplate the minutia of life and what it means. But yeah, I don't know. It's not often that I find a book, and I know I mentioned one actually like a handful of podcast episodes ago, but it's not that often that I find a book that like gets me thinking about life outside of the book. And when that happens, I want to tell everybody about it. I want to talk to everybody about it. I'm like, you got to read this. Did you read it the same way I did? Did you see yourself in the pages? It's just a thing that I do. So if you've ever been in a situation where you knew you weren't saying what you really wanted to say, maybe give yourself permission to say what you mean. If you've been critical of yourself, is that coming from a place of valid feedback? Or are you picking yourself apart, largely based on a story you're telling yourself, maybe not even the truth of the situation? If you're going through something challenging and you feel alone, somebody else probably has that same feeling of aloneness, even if they don't have those same exact circumstances. And though we may feel like we're stuck inside of a life we built, though making changes could be incredibly uncomfortable in the short run, in the long run, we may find ourselves in a life that feels more suited for us. So if you heard anything in this episode that kind of hit close to home, or maybe a truth that you've been carrying and keeping quiet came to the surface, maybe don't brush past it. Sit with it, journal about it, listen to it. If you're feeling discomfort, some type of ache, maybe you relate to that feeling of loneliness, those feelings that we got to rumble with are usually the beginning of something real, of something honest, of something that could look a little bit more like you, a life that can feel more yours, even if you don't know how you're going to get there, even if you don't know what it looks like. So if you're in that space now of asking questions and you feel like you're on the edge of change, or you feel like something needs to change, maybe the change has already happened and you're wondering what's next. I would love to invite you to download the guide I created, Reimagine Your Life. It is a free guided reflection and use AI as a thinking partner to kind of help you sort through all of the possibilities you may not have yet allowed yourself to even consider for yourself. You don't need to have it all figured out, but maybe just listen to yourself and see what's coming up. So if you go to my website, www.adriancrowley.com, you'll see a banner at the top. You'll see buttons for it throughout the page. Click on it, download it, and I will also put the link directly in the show notes or the episode description so you can download it. It's free. I think it'll really help you, and it will help you use AI in a way to expand your mind and expand possibilities in a way that's not about telling you what to do with your life. It just kind of helps you think about things in a little bit of a different way. I hope this has been helpful to you. I hope you pick up the book, The Wedding People. I'll also drop a link to that in the show notes, the episode description, just in case you want to check it out. It's a really good book, and it's put me in a very contemplative mood. So I thought I would bring that to you and see how you feel about that. Whether anything resonated, anything hit home, let me know. Hit me up on social. Reply to my weekly email that I send out if you're on my email list. And let's talk about it. I hope you have an amazing week, and until next time.
Thanks so much for spending time with me on Better Days Start Today. If you loved this episode, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast, and leave a review. It helps more people find this space and start creating their better days too. And hey, don't forget to sign up for my newsletter at adriancrowley.com. You'll get exclusive tips, tools, and access to complimentary events designed to support you every step of the way. Until next time, remember, your better days, they start today.